Welcome back, everyone, to Storytime with Xel. Sit back, relax, and let me spin you a tale. Chapters 11 and 12 of Eternal Care Forest. Chapter 11. Family. The sound of rushed footsteps come from the stairs, and 4 figures arrive at the top. Jeremiah, still in his plague doctor garb, holding his medical rod tight with both hands as he glares at the beast. Standing beside him on his left was Johnny, a tall, shirtless man with light blue scales flowing down from his neck along his back and sides, claw-like scars on his side, and a large bite mark on his shoulder, with green, slitted eyes and pale white hair and skin only a few shades more natural than Xelion's, with 4 black horns, similar in structure to Xel's, growing out of his head. Wearing a white bandana around his mouth like a bandit, and denim blue jeans with a rope belt, and blue scaled feet like a raptor's, with a long, muscular tail, with the same blue scales along the back of it, ending in a diamond-shaped paddle that had 2 gold piercings on it. His hands, which only had 3 fingers and a thumb each, also had the same blue scales going up to the elbows, with a bone-like spike growing out of the elbow joints, as well as growing out of several points along his spine. On Jer's right, there stood Andy, a woman clad in a black half-shirt that only strapped around one shoulder, and a long black leather cloth covering her crotch and backside but leaving her legs fully exposed. She had dark, slate-gray skin and black lips, with amethyst scales along her body in a similar pattern as Johnny's, with black hair and 4 black horns, and ice-blue eyes with black sclera. She also had a long tail, but more intimidating was her arms, as she had a second pair of arms much larger than her first set, and more closely resembled wings than hands. And standing next to Andy, with his knees shaking and a large dark spot on his pants where he lost control of himself, was William, biting his thumbnail and muttering over and over, "Not real. Not real." The red-scaled beast growls and roars at them, "All must die," and charges at Jeremiah, only to be knocked into the floor when Johnny does a fast front flip and slams his tail paddle against the top of the demon's head, the gold piercings letting out a resonating hum. Before the beast can even stand back up, Jeremiah raises his medical rod and pushes himself up off the ground with his tail, and water quickly bubbles up from the floor itself around the beast, lifting and launching it back against the wall. James had managed to back himself into the far wall, trying to stay as far away from the beast and Xelion's monster family, but stared in confusion at Will, who didn't seem to be even remotely aware of what was going on. Andy uses one of her wing arms to push down on Will's head as she says coldly, "Sit." And Will promptly sits down on the floor, slowly rocking back and forth, still chewing on his thumbnail, which by now was bleeding quite a bit, as he shakes his head from side to side slowly and repeatedly, uncontrollably, and his eyes had a definite vacant look. Andy then walks over to the beast as it starts to get back up, grabbing its neck by one of her wing arms, its neck instantly forming ice crystals from Andy's touch as she lifts it up and starts laying punch after fierce, bone-cracking punch with her other 3 hands. It slashed violently at her with its claws, cutting her sides and shoulders, but it didn't stop her relentless onslaught. Johnny walked toward Andy on her right side, blocking off the beast from that side, while Jeremiah walks over to Andy's left, blocking off the other side so the beast couldn't escape them. Andy then grabs the beast's arms with her first set of arms, and its neck with both her wing arms, shoving it against the wall. Jeremiah raises his left hand palm up as if lifting something, and a large bubble of water forms around the beast's head. Then Jer moves his hand forward like he were pushing something, and the bubble of water starts forcing its way into the beast's mouth and nose, flooding its lungs and drowning it. Then Andy and Johnny's bodies start flowing with arcing electricity, just like Xelion did before, and Johnny shoves his hand against the beast, sending powerful jolts of lightning from both of them into the drowning beast, electrocuting it from within. James couldn't quite see the beast with all three of them blocking it, but gasped when a vast amount of black blood splatters against the wall, all the way up to the ceiling. Andy lets the pieces of the beast's neck fall from her grip as she turns around to face James, glaring at him with what looked like irritated disgust, as she walks up to him as he tries to back up further into the wall. She speaks with a voice like she couldn't care less about his response as she says, "Get up." James hesitates for a few seconds, then starts to push himself up, only to have one of Andy's large wing hands reach between his legs and grab his crotch roughly and lifts him up off the floor by his groin with a powerful and extremely freezing grip, giving a most painful and not in any way pleasurable experience as she says, "Pitiful. I'll break you faster than I broke him," pointing with one of her normal-sized hands to William. Then drops James back onto the floor, where he promptly sits back down and grabs his crotch tight to try and stop the stinging pain, before being pressed back against the floor by his face when Andy pushes and holds his face down with her foot, grinning down at him as he tries and fails to push her foot off. Xelion walks over to Andy, placing his metal hand, which was now back to normal with the sword hidden inside, as he says, "Careful there, Andy. You're gonna give me a hard-on acting like that. Then the whole room's gonna need some Windex," and spanks her butt with his normal hand, then laughs at her response of, "When don't you have a hard-on?" Then she licks Zell's mask straight up the middle before pushing his face away with her hand as she says simply, "Later, Daddy. I got stuff to do to Flo," while she walks back over to Jeremiah and Johnny. Xelion then looks down at James and says happily, "There are kids, Jer and me. Andy there is our daughter, and Flo and Johnny are our sons. Tee-hee. And we have so many more. But you'll meet them later." James wanted to scream at him, to keep fighting him, but the most he could get out was a whimper of, "What did you do to William?" And Zell says proudly, "We freed his mind, of course. He couldn't be happier. Ain't that right, Willie?" As he looks over to William, who looks over to James and Zell slowly, then starts laughing uncontrollably, a loud, maniacal laugh that lasted nearly a full minute. Xelion looks back to James while pointing at Will and says, "Just look at that smile. I know you got eyes, kiddo. I made 'em after all." James looks at Will, so far gone from just 1 day ago. Then looks to Zell with tears in his eyes as he asks, "So, now what are you going to do to me?" Chapter 12. Sweet Mother. Zell slaps his own knee as he breaks out in laughter. "Me? Most certainly not. I gotta stitch up and prep Din-Din. I am a father, after all. I can bring you pain, a most incredible pain, to every single nerve in your entire body. I can kill you and bring you back, over and over, as many times as I want. But Jer over there?" Pointing to Jeremiah as the doctor turns around and gives off a sense of foreboding and malicious intent from his plague mask somehow, as Xelion continues, "My sweet soulmate can get inside your mind and tear it all apart. Telekinetics, my friend. and Johnny leans over from behind Jeremiah to say, "Telepathic, Dad." And Zell nods in response and says, "Right, telepathetic. Jer's gonna get in your head and show you the deepest fear you have, and dance around in that weak little brain a while longer until he frees you from the prison of your own reason and logic." Jeremiah and Johnny both looked at each other and shrugged, with Johnny saying, "Well, at least he gets the concept." Then turning to head back downstairs, calling out to those below, "Yo, Andy, don't tie Big Brother Flo up yet. I need more hog tying practice." And William mindlessly gets up and starts following Johnny downstairs. Xelion walks over to Jeremiah, while his metal armor and mask slides apart and becomes tentacles again, leaving him bare-chested again with the metal substance sliding inside Zell's skin, and showing the electrical horns and tendrils again. Then he gives Jer a loving hug with his arms and tentacles, lifting up Jer's mask, revealing the doctor's face briefly. Both of his eyes were red with black along the eyelids, though his right eye was obviously blind and very pale. However, the left was clearly a cybernetic design similar to James's new eyes. And it also had a distinct claw-like scar along it, with deep indigo scales along his cheeks and forehead, with some sort of gemstone in the center of his forehead, and his upper lip was black. Zell then retracts his teeth right into his own jaws as he leans close to give Jeremiah a long, loving kiss, while pressing the cloth of Jer's coat close and groping his butt with both hands. Then leans back and extends his teeth again and says happily, "I love you, my dear sweet Jer. Give 'em hell, and I'll give us all some BBQ devil meat." Then walks over to where the beast was earlier, which now was a heap of bones and scales, ripped apart and split open all the way up its torso. Some parts of it were even inside out, with a ton of raw meat on the underside of its scales. Zell wraps the beast's carcass up with his tentacles, and they actually grip it tight, as if they were fully corporeal, and lift it effortlessly. Holding the corpse up behind his back while Zell walks with it toward the stairs, while using his metal claws and thread to start stitching up the large wound in his side from James's earlier sword strike, while resting his normal hand behind his back, just above his pants as he heads downstairs, leaving a thick trail of black blood along the floor from the demonic beast. Jeremiah then puts his plague mask back on and comes close to James and kneels down in front of him while constantly staring at his eyes. James growls weakly and starts to say, "Oh yeah? Fuck you. You can't... You can't..." But trails off as he looks at the doctor's mask, and the edges of his vision start distorting and getting blurry, while Jeremiah himself remained in perfect focus. Soon after, James started shaking his head and pushing himself against the wall with his feet, his voice shaking and weak as he says, No, Mom, you're dead. You're fucking dead." As he sees Jeremiah's plague mask and body somehow twist and shift into the sickly pale face and white hospital gown of his own mother, an elderly woman with only a few strands of hair and a look of utter disgust on her face as she says, "You let me die, James." James backs further into the wall, which seems to melt around him like tar and pin him in place by stabbing into his veins, like hundreds of needles along his arms and legs, making him scream from the pain, widening his eyes in pure terror as his mother's medical rod turns into a hospital IV stand with a bag filled of what looked like the same tar, and the connection into her right arm was bleeding badly. His mother then places her left hand on James's shoulder, holding a simple red pocket knife. And James started whimpering breathlessly, No, please." And she flicks the blade out as she says, "You could have just let time take me, but you were too greedy for an inheritance," and drags the blade down from his shoulder, all the way down his left arm to his wrist, splitting his whole arm open and letting blood spill out everywhere, making James scream yet again, only now he barely had a breath left in him, with tears streaming down his scarred face. His mother, however, has started bleeding from her eyes, nose, ears, and mouth as she takes the knife into her right hand, pressing it against James's right shoulder as she adds coldly, "I never even wanted you to begin with," and drags the blade down to his wrist again, splitting his arm open and making a huge puddle of blood around them. He opens his mouth to scream, but nothing even comes out anymore. Defeated, James looks into his mother's eyes and mouths the words, "I love you." But his mother snaps back with, "Ungrateful liar," and shoves the blade into James's neck and mouth. Then James, a mess of blood, pain, and despair, passes out from the blood loss and quickly fades into death. Jeremiah tilts his head a bit as James slowly slides over from the wall and lays against the floor. His arms were perfectly fine, and aside from his facial wounds, James was not bleeding anywhere else. Jeremiah had never even moved an inch from his position in front of James the entire time, nor said a single word during the 2 minutes while James freaked out and started screaming in agony. He had simply stared at James silently, and let his own mind attack itself through Jeremiah's mental influence. Jer then grabs James's foot and stands up, holding his medical rod behind him, resting atop his long tail, swaying it as always in a limnoskip pattern as he drags James along with him over to the stairs. Thank you all for listening. This has been chapters 11 and 12 of Eternal Care Asylum, or Eternal Care Forest. Either way. Thank you for listening. Only one chapter remains. Sweet dreams.